You're always attacked emotionally first. Tell you what I mean by that. At the very instant that you perceive a threat, you get a deluge of endocrines. Most people call it the adrenaline rush. It's more than adrenaline, but we can call it that because we don't have to be biologists. Let's call it the adrenaline rush. And the purpose of that adrenaline rush is to flood you with fuel for survival. And that happens in about somewhere around a tenth of the amount of time it takes for you to blink. That's how fast that hits you. It's an emotionally based response. And there's nothing you can do about it. You're going to get hit with this when you perceive a threat. The way we want to manage a threat, we have all kinds of skills, right? We want to, parry five or block the punch or throw this kick or whatever your scene is, right? That's your calculated response. But you haven't got a prayer at doing that unless you're able to manage your emotional response. As long as you're responding emotionally, as long as you're driven by emotion, you're fucked. You have to be able to manage it. Now, you're going to feel that no matter what. But you have to learn to deal with it. So all our training is about calculated responses. We practice parries, we practice punches, we practice cuts and thrusts and so on, right? It's very important to understand that calculated response is learned. Look, emotions are hardwired into the species, all right? Emotions are immediate. Your calculated response, your thinking response, your trained response, your critical thinking response, that's delayed. That's delayed substantially. Your emotional response has been instinctive. Your calculated response is learned. Your emotional response is involuntary, and your calculated response is voluntary. It's a decision. Your emotional response is unconscious. Your calculated response is conscious. With training, it can get closer to unconscious, if we're smart. More about that in a second. What else? Your emotional response is effortless, automatic. Nature takes care of it. You don't have to do shit. Your calculated response is difficult. It requires effort. Emotional response is natural. You could say that your calculated response is engineered or man-made, right? So all those things, really, you have to understand the distinction between emotional response and rational response. Because you can't do both at the same time. You cannot do both at the same time. As long as you're being driven by emotion, then all your thinking is out the window. All your calculated responses, all that shit, ain't gonna happen. You have to be able to manage that emotional response and implement your preferred calculated responses. Instead of doing what nature is telling you to do, you need to say, excuse me, I prefer to do this, right? And intercede in that natural flow of action. That's not easy to do. That's what training is about. You could say that the purpose of training is to close the gap between your emotional response and your calculated response, so that your calculated response comes earlier, right? So that your emotional response doesn't have a big jump on you before you finally collect yourself and do something. If your emotional response takes an eighth of a second, you want your calculated response to be within a quarter of a second. You want it right on top of that. And the more you can eliminate the gap between your emotional response and your calculated response, the better you're going to fight. And the less emotionally driven you'll be, and the less manipulated you will be. We talk all the time about becoming the locus of control of your opponent's behavior. As long as I can keep you responding emotionally, I can make you do whatever I want. whatever I want. Once you start thinking critically, or implementing your calculated response, or stepping back and using your situational awareness to assess things, and getting a grip and not let your emotions drive you, okay, then I'm going to have to do some work, right? So if I can keep you afraid, if I can keep you angry, whatever that is, those are the two big ones in a fight. But you can also use joy. You can use any emotion to manipulate someone. It's amazing. And as long as I can do that to you, I can completely control your behavior. I can get you to do things that you'd swear to God and 10 other white men you'd never do. But I can make you do it.
So we talked about being attacked emotionally first, and that training closes the gap between the emotional reaction and being able to intentionally act. And I'd like to talk more about that. How do you do that? How do you do that? This is not something I experienced before working with you. And one of the things I realized early on is that you intentionally do that in training and teaching. You intentionally introduce and increase emotional stress so that the student learns to manage an increased level of stress and still be able to function. So can you talk a little bit about that process, how you do that?
Well, let's see. First, let me give a sort of shout out to Tony Blauer on this, because he's a self-defense teacher who has really done a lot of research into fear and fear management. So you get a chance, you ought to check out his stuff. Everything he says is what I'm going to say, and I assume he's right because he agrees with me. I learned this from my horse, actually. I started thinking about this in observing the way my horse dealt with threats. We'd be out trail riding or something, and there would be something, an equinivorous leaf or something would move. And he went through a process in dealing with things. And the process started with, he'd spin, freeze, and look at it. And then he would listen to it, sniff the air. You start snorting and stuff like that. He's trying to catch the scent. He's trying to figure out what this thing is. What is this? And then maybe you'll approach it. Maybe not directly. Maybe kind of, checking it out. A little closer. Get close enough, he'll sniff it up close, maybe rub his nuzzle on it, So there's this process, by which he desensitizes himself to the stimulus. It's amazing to watch. Watch him go through this. I thought, man, that's really smart. So Tony Blauer has an acronym for this. He calls it FUCK fear. And FUCK stands for face it, understand it, confront it, and know it. Isn't that great? So the first thing you have to do is face it, which means drop your bullshit. If you're afraid, say so. There's nothing wrong with that. It is a natural thing. If you don't feel fear, there's something wrong with you. Only the dead are without fear. So accept it, face it, and then try to understand the nature of your fear. What is it? What do I see? Another nice acronym for fear is false expectations appearing real. Why am I imbuing this with the power to make me afraid? What is it about this thing? What is it I'm really afraid of? Confronting it. That's the big jump. Get right in its face. I'll tell you, I was a volunteer firefighter for a while. And this was Plato in action. Plato said, do the thing you fear. Well, firefighting involves about everything I fear. So naturally, I signed up to do it. Right? That's my juju. I was so afraid of being afraid that I've done a lot of stupid things to prove to myself I wasn't afraid. Don't go down that road. That's stupid. But live and learn. Anyway, one of the things in firefighting was, climbing up on the roof of a house or jumping in a third-story window or out of a third-story window. These are not my favorite things. And so I decided to do a process of desensitizing myself to going up on a high ladder. So first I bought a 30-foot step ladder, extension ladder, and put it up against my house so I could climb up the ladder. And I got up on the first step. And I stood on the first step of the ladder, and I looked around, I held on with one hand, I danced a little bit, got slouched, got real comfortable on the first step of that ladder, and I stepped down, and I had a bite of carrot cake. And then I went up 2 steps. And I hung out on the second step of the ladder, and I looked around, I danced, and all this stuff, doing gymnastics on the second step of the ladder, and I stepped down, and I rewarded myself with some carrot cake. You see where this is going? And yes, I repeated that process up every fucking step of the ladder until I got up, arguably to within a couple of steps. I didn't go all the way up, right? Because you fall off the ladder. There's got to be a couple of rungs ahead of you, right? But I went all up that fucking ladder, and at the top, I hung out there for a while. Sang a song, did a little dance, made love, got down tonight, just up at the top of the ladder. Looking out, surveying my domain from on high, like the king in the tower of the castle. You can do that. You do the thing you fear. It's like a magic trick. Fear is like a magic trick. And once you know how it works, you can never be fooled by it again. Once you understand and confront it, you'll never be afraid of that thing in the same way ever again. You might still respect it, I don't go up a 35-foot ladder without a ladder belt. I'm not stupid, right? But I'm not afraid. See, that's a different scene. To be unafraid doesn't mean to be... In fact, it's not being unafraid. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the conquest and defiance of fear. It's giving fear a good old fuck you, I'm going to do it anyway. What was the question? Oh, anyway, so by a process of progressive exposure to the stimulus, to the thing you fear, you can sort of desensitize. People try and do this with horses all the time. If he's afraid of a tarp on the ground or an umbrella opening, whatever, you desensitize him to this, you desensitize him to that, you desensitize him to something else. But, there's more things on heaven or on earth, Horatio, than you can ever possibly desensitize your horse to individually. You'll spend the rest of your life finding things to desensitize him to. So at some point, you make a leap. And what that leap is with your horse is that your horse learns, if you deserve it, if you earn it, he will learn that you can be trusted, that you're a good decision maker. And if you say it's okay to walk across that tarp, he says, okay, I'll trust you. My instinct says don't walk on that tarp, but I trust you. I'll do it. And walk across the tarp. So once you have a relationship where your horse trusts you to make those decisions, he will at times, not entirely, because he's not stupid. He's still a horse, right? But he'll go a long way to say, okay, to defer to your leadership. Leadership is maybe not the right term. He'll defer to your competence and trust you to go along with something. And once you have that relationship, it doesn't matter what specific thing you bump into that you've never seen before in your life. If you're cool about it, your horse will be cool about it. He'll take his cues from you. He'll read you, and as long as you're relaxed and okay, it's I guess there's nothing to be afraid of. Adam's okay. I guess it's all right. Right? And this is what you do with yourself. in your inoculations against stress. At some point, and you could go through your life and find every little bitty thing that might be stressful and do it until it doesn't stress you anymore. Might not have time to do a lot else, right? But it's possible to get to a point where you can say, whatever happens, I can deal with it. I know the process. I know I'm going to get hit with emotions, and I know what I have to do when that happens. I know what it feels like. And I know what I have to do. I know the process. I gotta, back off, take a breath, whatever I've trained myself to do to deal with it. I know I can do that. And that's better than trying to desensitize yourself to every possible stress in the world, right? Is that an answer of any kind? Does that make any sense to you?
That makes sense to me.
Good. Would you explain it to me?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good point about how you can desensitize someone to a specific stimulus, but at some point there's just, you can't desensitize to everything, and I've heard you say that also in lessons and in tactical situations, that you can train to deal with each individual situation, but there's so many that will never, you'll never get to the end of that.
Right.
So just say a couple words more about helping your student understand that it is a process.
Well,
that it isn't just each individual thing.
Yeah. Well, since you can't account for each individual, how many possible variations are there of parry and riposte in combat? Approximately 6.7 zillion. Right? And you can't train for each one of those. But what you can do is train principles. And this is where the tactical principles come in. Oh, what do I do? What do I do? Well, put the point on the target, feel the steel, take your time, keep your distance, continue the phrase. Boom, that's what you do. And it doesn't matter what the fucking stimulus is. If you do those 5 things, you'll be okay. See, that's a lot better than trying to say, oh, what do I do if it's a 1-2? What do I do if it's a coupe? What if I do if it's a coupe distance? See? You could drive yourself crazy trying to come up with specific responses to specific cues. And, that ain't the way to play, man. So you cultivate principles. You cultivate principles. In karate that I did, we spent a lot of time just doing things like always yield. If someone is using force against you, don't confront force with force. Yield and use their own force against them. So that gets to be a principle. It doesn't matter whether he throws a punch or a kick or he's swinging a club or whatever. I'm not going to oppose that with force. I'm going to look for a way to combine our energy together and have it pass by me and thump into him.
So I think this comes right back around to where we started with being attacked emotionally first. I think maybe the piece that a lot of people miss is that there is an emotional attack. That is an attack.
Yes, that is the attack.
Yeah.
Emotion. Fear is the weapon, man. Fear is the weapon. Not the club, not the knife, not the gun. It's fear that's the weapon. So if you can learn to manage your fear, you can deal with the other shit. And you can. I mean, it's not perfect. Nobody's Superman, right? But that initial jolt of adrenaline, emotion, that's the thing. If you can survive the first 3 seconds of a fight, your odds of survival go up exponentially. Because that means you're responding, you have that emotional response, and you have that much time to manage it. And rather than trying to fight out, and again, here's where Tony Blauer is, I love this guy, oddly enough, we seem to have parallel lives. He talks about how he went through this and through that, and developed this and learned this and so on. I'm going, yeah, me too. That's exactly what happened to me. That's what I did. That's what I said. So it would be cool to just have coffee with this cat sometime and just like, we would sit there like two Buddhas going, yes, I know you know. Yes, I know you know. I know you know. You know I know. But anyway, Where was I going with that? I had to mention. I just was thinking about Tony Blair.
Managing fear, that's the attack.
Oh yeah. So the idea is not to fight it. Not to fight it. You know that emotional thing is going to happen to you. It's not like you know. It's not like you're resisting. You need to roll with it. You need to use it. And one of the things that he has developed for self-defense purposes is what he calls, I think he calls it the spear or something like that. And it's using your flinch reflex as your first move, your first response to that emotion. And your flinch reflex is going to happen anyway. So why not just use it? Instead of trying to not do it, just do it. And do it and, shape it in a way, right? And that becomes the transition between the emotional flood and your, calculated Mugu Gaipan response, and that's very sharp. That's very sharp, I'm not sure how it always applies in some other areas. I'm sure it does. I don't have a laundry list I can spell out for you of how right now. But I think it's a fascinating idea. And I think he's right on. Anyway, that's what I think.